Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about quantifiers and determiners. These are words we use to talk about quantity, when we don't want to say an exact number. We use them all the time in everyday English, especially when we talk about people, time, food, or things like music and concerts. Let's start with countable nouns. These are things we can count, 1, 2, 3, and so on. For example, people, dogs, songs, or fans are countable. When we talk about countable nouns, we often use many, not many, or a few. We use many to talk about a large number of countable nouns. We often use many in questions, negative sentences, and sometimes in positive sentences, especially in more formal English. For example, how many people went to the concert? Or did many people go to the concert? We can also say many people went to the concert, or not many people went to the concert. We also use a few with countable nouns to say there is a small number, but enough. We only use a few in positive sentences. For example, there were a few people at the concert. This means there were not many people, but some people were there. Now let's move on to uncountable nouns. These are things we cannot count individually, like time, milk, music, or butter. With uncountable nouns, we use much, not much, or a little. We usually use much in questions and negative sentences, not very often in positive sentences. For example, how much time is there? There isn't much time. Or is there much milk? There isn't much milk. We can also use it in the past, like was there much time? There wasn't much time. To talk about a small quantity of uncountable nouns in positive sentences, we use a little. For example, is there any milk? There's a little milk. This means there is some milk, but not a lot. Now let's look at a lot of and lots of. These two expressions are very common and very flexible. We can use a lot of and lots of with both countable and uncountable nouns. We can also use them in positive and negative sentences and in questions. For example, with countable nouns, we say there are a lot of fans at the concert, or are there a lot of people here? With uncountable nouns, we say there's lots of music, or is there lots of milk? Remember, we cannot say how a lot of. We always say how many or how much. To make a sentence negative with a lot of or lots of, we put not before it. For example, there aren't a lot of dogs, or there isn't lots of milk. The same works in the past. There weren't a lot of people at the concert. Now let's talk about very, quite, and rather. These words help us change the strength of adjectives and adverbs. We use very to make an adjective stronger. For example, it's cold becomes it's very cold. Or the concert was fun becomes the concert was very fun. We can also use not very to make the meaning weaker, like it's not very interesting. We use quite and rather to make the adjective less extreme than very. For example, it's quite cold, the music was rather boring, or we're quite tired after the concert. These sound softer and more neutral. We can also use quite and rather before quantity expressions like a few and a lot of. For example, there were quite a few people at the concert, there were quite a lot of fans, or we drank rather a lot of wine. These expressions help us be more precise without using numbers. Finally, let's connect this grammar with some music vocabulary. At a concert, there are often a lot of fans and sometimes a big crowd. You might listen to rock, pop, jazz, or classical music. A singer or artist can play the guitar, piano, or drums, and fans like to listen to music or dance to songs. For example, there were quite a few musicians on stage, or we listened to a lot of music last night. So, to finish, remember this: use many and a few with countable nouns, much and a little with uncountable nouns, and a lot of or lots of with both. Use very to make adjectives stronger, and quite, or rather to make them softer. If you think first about whether the noun is countable or uncountable, choosing the right word becomes much easier.